Welcome to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the Strategy Corp Institute of Public Policy and Economy. And as always, I'm your host, Mitch Davidson. And today we're going to have a very interesting conversation about COVID, the economy, and what's happened and what is likely to happen with our guest today, who is Armine Yalnizyan, who is a Canadian economist and Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, as well as a regular columnist in a number of publications, including the Toronto Star and many other media appearances, and also previously serving as a senior economic policy advisor to the Federal Deputy Minister of Employment and Social Development Canada, probably most well known in this current context for coining the phrase she session and doing quite a lot of work on labor policy and childcare in Canada. So a boatload of topics to get to. Armine, thanks for joining us today.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Mitch.
Yeah, so we've actually had a few conversations before on different panels and webinars and things, and I thought, people seem to enjoy them, so why not do it again in a way that we can actually, broadcast it to the broader public and not just a lucky select few of students or conference participants. So no shortage of things to get to. So I say, why not just kind of jump right in with the pandemic and its impact on the economy and those sorts of things. So I would like to think optimistically it's mid-November 2021, and I would like to think we're on the decline of this thing. Vaccination rates increasing, albeit slowly now. We have youth vaccination coming on board. In fact, just confirmed that it was approved, I think, today. We've got booster shots, so the economy is starting to reopen much closer to what it was pre-pandemic. Economically, I think it's still a very interesting time. We may be out of the woods on the health crisis, perhaps. I don't know if we're out of the woods economically. So I'd like to just kind of start with that. Are we out of the woods? Do you see any serious concerns for the Canadian economy writ large? And what do we kind of expect to come next post-COVID-19?
Great questions, because everybody wants to know what's next. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you one thing that is 110% predictable. It's been happening since the late 40s and early 50s. That's the baby boom. The effects of the baby boom is coming to a neighborhood near you, and the pandemic did not press pause on that. In fact, the pandemic poured accelerant on a process of population aging when it affects the economy in the form of more people exiting the labor market than entering the labor market. And that's what population aging does. But of course, we've seen an acceleration of the number of people aged 55 and older in the population. And within that population, an acceleration of the share who have dropped out entirely from the labor market. They're not looking for work and they're not working. That phenomenon is going to happen throughout the global north. Every country that is an advanced economy had a baby boom. China came to it later because of its one-child policy in the 1980s, but it is starting to deal with that. South Korea is, in fact, aging the most rapidly. Japan, as you know, is the leader in population aging. And, watching what happens in Japan portends very seriously on what our mix of technological change, skills development, and immigration should and could be going forward. But without question, the richest countries in the world are going to be seeing a profound global slowdown in GDP growth. And GDP growth has been the holy grail for every party everywhere in the world for my entire lifetime. So the interesting thing will be not just what happens to the economy, but what happens to the political conversation around what governments are for and who they're for. You have touched on this a bit. So has the Conservative Party in Canada, both at the federal and the provincial level, have kind of read the room rather dramatically. And here's the big picture story. Because of population aging, we are looking, and because we are talking about more exits than entrants, and because the whole world is going to be, the whole rich world is going to be dealing with this at the same time, we will be competing with everybody else in the world for immigrants. So we're going to need all hands on deck. It's going to be the smallest working age cohort we have seen in half a century, with much slower rates of growth and less, falling fertility rates. How we deal with our own people is going to be a huge issue. So we are looking at going from roughly 40 years of labor surpluses to about 25 or 30 years of labor shortages. And we will not be alone in the world, and we will be competing, and we'll be looking at one another to see what are the solutions for this. So the idea that workers are going to be suddenly more valuable, not only politically, but economically, is going to be a new phenomenon for everybody to wrap their head around. But we are definitely in a new world right now. And I'm just going to say as an asterisk, of course, there's climate events too, which seem to be accelerating in number and devastation. So these two things are going to slow GDP growth dramatically. And every party has to deal with what's your solution to an inhabitable place to live, an inhabitable planet. And what's your solution to shifting gears from workers are disposable and you can get a dime a dozen to suddenly they're the most valuable asset we've got to run the economy?
Yeah, I'm gonna say climate change is a pretty big asterisk, but you know,
yeah,
it's
I just wanted, but you know, so many people talk about it that I wanted to put a lot of emphasis on something that is just beginning to happen politically. Right. That, as I said, the Conservatives in Canada have been the first to capitalize on politically in terms of how they frame the rhetoric. I think you'll know that I don't think they've got the right solutions, but they've got absolutely the right approach to what are the big issues that we are all going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I want to get to that. I think there's a few things we have to sort of unpack in the answer. The first thing I'll say on the climate change point is, you talk about a labor shortage, you talk about impacts from climate change. Those are going to be inherently related. You just look at something like what's happening in BC right now, and you see some of the photos of what needs to be rebuilt and you know, built in a more resilient and climate adaptive way. I'm very interested to see where the workers come from to do that. And you know, I saw a couple interesting pieces recently that we rely on the military more and more to do these types of things because we don't necessarily have the workforces in place, and that there's not enough of them to go around either. So I think, you know, you're highlighting an interesting example where you can sort of bring it down to the micro from the macro. But on that sort of macro perspective of labor shortages, you know, this is going to be a chronic issue. I think we're sort of people are starting to read the tea leaves and understand that cost of services goes up as you have an aging population, you have a smaller tax base to address it. You know, as we talk about trying to grow the workforce, to me, there's a few ways to do that. You can increase immigration targets and those sorts of things, which you've mentioned, and likely something that the entire world or developed world is going to attempt to do at the same time. But another way is to actually try to get people who are out of the workforce back in, either those who are on social assistance, those who are taking care of an elderly person or taking care of a child. You know, is there going to be a bigger push for the role of government to mobilize people back into the labor force by taking care of those concerns that are more primary for them and causing them to exit the labor force in the first place?
Well, we can't get people back to work if there are no ways of leaving the people that you have identified, people that are too old, too young, and too sick to work, need care. So ironically, the way to get more people back to work is actually providing more jobs so that people can get back to work in the care economy. So actually, that's good news. The question is, how do we fill them? So that's a mix of training people, providing skills development that may not be a one-hit wonder, you know, immediate post-secondary or immediate after unemployment. It might be an ongoing, you know, lifelong learning phenomenon, but just not 4 years at a stretch, you know, so doing much more on-the-job training and more short leaves to be able to upgrade your skills in a particular module. I think we can expect to see that happen. But the historic response to labor shortages in our country has been immigration. And I don't know if you noticed, but Quebec said, Quebec, who has been lobbying to get more control over its immigration policies since the 1980s, when we had a huge backlog of immigrants. Quebec said recently that it wants the federal government to ease restrictions on temporary foreign workers so that they can get more workers into long-term care. What could go wrong? Long-term care, which was where we saw the most people die in the country because of terrible health human resource practices that are based on high turnover levels, terrible working conditions, low pay. And the people that are most likely to do that are migrant workers or immigrants, right? So if we do not address the conditions of work, we will not address the conditions of care. And part of that is, what's the mix? We're going to need, we can't just develop our own people. We don't have enough people. So the real issue for governments is going to be how they align their policies between skills development of our own people to maximize their potential, so that we have fewer people on the sidelines, more people actually contributing to the tax base, as you mentioned, but certainly to the quality of life and to their own households' incomes. And how we deal with labor shortages through not only immigration, but migration. So we often think about immigration, that's it, that's the answer to labor shortages. But since about the year 2000, we started accelerating our reliance on temporary foreign workers and migrant workers. That is, people that come here without any permanent residency status. Their permits can get renewed, but there's a very small fraction of those people that ever make the transition over to permanent residency. So I think we're going to be re-looking at what immigration means too, and what it means to rely on temporary foreign workers, migrant workers, to be able to meet our labor shortages. You know, we've got an historic opportunity sitting right in front of us. It's being handed to us on a silver platter to actually, you know, through the process of needing all hands on deck, to maximize the potential of our own people, to bring people who have been sidelined or have historically had very few opportunities for good jobs and good training to get in there, you know, actually reduce inequalities between historically and systemically disadvantaged groups. And people on social assistance would be one of them, but racialized minorities, new immigrants, indigenous populations, and of course, young people. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention women as a very large minority group, or, you know, half of the population that is consistently devalued in their work, in whatever sector you're looking at, but particularly in the care economy.
So let's go there. Let's go there, right? Because I think what you said here a couple of times, you know, I think of this analogy from when I was in political office. That, you know, the way to get rid of a deficit, you can either raise taxes or cut services, and governments obviously don't really love doing either of those things. So they try to squeeze the stone a little bit harder, and they say, you know, we're going to have economic growth. You know, you're kind of painting a similar parallel where it's like, oh, okay, well, if we have a labor shortage, we can either bring more people into the country, or there's actually this interesting approach, which is get more out of the people who are already here, treat them better, train them better, get them in more sustainable jobs, make their jobs more sustainable. So one of the ways you do that is you allow women to get back into the workforce quickly, who have had to exit the workforce for a completely legitimate and actually beneficial to the country reason, which is having a child. So childcare has really been one of these topics that we've seen, you know, and I don't want to conflate all issues with women in the labor force as childcare issues, but let's talk about childcare for a second, because it is really one of the sort of lasting legacies of COVID. Is, I think, everybody realized the burden that childcare really can be, in addition to the joy it could be, but how much work it truly is when people were doing that at home on a daily basis. Now we have a national commitment to $10 a day. We have a few provinces, including Ontario, who are holding out right now and still negotiating a deal. Is this the right way forwards? Is this a great step? Is there more to be done? What's your view on the sort of $10 a day childcare position, and how that's going to help impact the labor shortage for the better?
Well, you know, I've been saying since last summer, a year ago, this past summer, no recovery without a she-covery, and no she-covery without childcare. Hit summer song seemed to get some legs. People were grooving along with it. And yet we had more parents returning. Well, we had more parents returning to the labor force, but it seems like a lot of grandmas have dropped out. So the unpaid part of care, you cannot overestimate the value of being loved by your parents and by your extended family and cared for. But by the same token, after about 30 years of pretty stagnant wage growth, women have become indispensable to the family household income and disposable purchasing power. So it isn't just getting them back in the workforce, it's stabilizing purchasing power of Canadians. And since we're dealing with population aging, roughly 1 in 4 Canadian by the year 2030 is going to be over the age of 65. What happens when you're over the age of 65? You start thinking about retirement. More people will be retiring. What does retirement mean? It means lower incomes and fixed incomes. So the thing you were talking about earlier, no politician wants to raise taxes or cut services. They will be in a place where they can't do that. Like they literally, you know, the olds will not tolerate any kind of price increase. They will fight vigorously against tax increases and price increases. That includes wage increases. And they will be needing more services. Yeah, you can cut the services. It just means more people are going to die, quite literally. So, and the olds will be the last. They're the most effective lobby thus far anyway. So it's the services that they rely on are going to be the last ones to be cut, probably from an electoral point of view, right? To keep the politicians elected and keep them in office, they're going to need to address these issues, at least for the next 10 years. After that, you know, the millennials might be getting way more effective in their political engagement and shaping the conversation. So where does childcare fit in this?
Yeah.
You are completely right that the pandemic really lifted the hood on the role of unpaid care and the need for social infrastructure. People in the United States love to slag the Liberals talking about daycare as social infrastructure, but there's this role that roads and bridges play that also the care economy plays. If you have no place to leave your kid, you can't go to work. So we know that no transport minister would stand up and say, we're reopening the economy. We think it's going to go full tilt. And we just lost 25 to 30% of our roads and bridges. You know that government would have a plan to replace them because people can't get inputs in for their production. They can't get their products out. They can't get to work. We did not have the same approach to childcare, but that federal plan was the building block for saying, this is more than a woman's issue. This is more than about choice. Am I going to stay at home or not? It's like 50% of payroll was women before we hit the pandemic. You know, women have less self-employment, but 50% of payroll were women. So you can't just, you know, wipe it off and say, well, you know, you deal with it, that we've lost 25, 30. In some communities, it's over 60% of childcare spaces that have been lost. We don't measure it very well, but anecdotally, we're hearing how much has been crippled. So what the federal government and the 8 provinces, now 9 provinces with Alberta, and 1 territory did by signing these deals is not fixing it. It's saying we are committed to fixing it. We are committed to expanding affordable, high quality care where the people providing the care are properly trained. All the expansion anyway, they're not dealing with what already exists. They're just saying whatever we add to the system with these federal dollars, people will be qualified, highly trained. There will be a wage grid in place. There will be a wage floor. In too many provinces, people working in childcare get paid less than animal groomers. They have less qualifications required by the system than people that tend to your pets and zookeepers. So we need to leave our most vulnerable with people that are trained and qualified, and there's some kind of eye over what kind of care they're getting. I'm not saying you can't have family-based care or even home-based care, but as you expand a system, you need to be expanding it to the highest possible quality, because that's what's going to reduce inequalities in learning that lead to lifelong inequalities in earning. So if we have an eye to develop a system that is geared to making every child learning ready when they enter school and being cared for properly, preschool and then after school hours, then you know you're going to level the playing field. You're going to maximize the potential of the next generation of kids who are increasingly even more of a valued asset than our workforce because our fertility rates continue to drop. So every child will be a wanted child and every child will be supported to reach their maximum potential. That's the goal of this childcare plan. We're nowhere near it, but that's the goal of how we expand and move towards a system that honors the people providing the care and also lifts up the children's potential before they even get into school.
Well, it's just to say, I was going to say, it's kind of is to say that, having a child is almost becoming a bit of a luxury, right? In the sense that it is expensive to do, raising a child is expensive. And then add on top the fact that you actually need to withdraw yourself and your income earning potential from the workforce. Then, we're creating a situation where only those who are well off really truly feel comfortable having kids. And I don't have the data in front of me, but I would suspect that you're also seeing the average size of the family decrease in addition to lower fertility rates. Is
100%.
Those who are having kids
the
are
average,
having fewer, right?
Yeah. What's interesting is that the larger families are often low income. Why are they low income? Because the women are at home, right? So, it's just this crazy situation where, again, we have being handed to us on a silver platter. If we make every job a good job in this sector, we are creating great jobs. We're permitting people to go back to work. We're not telling people they can't stay at home with their kids. We're just giving women the true choice to go to work when they are ready to work and to withdraw when they are not. And it's not a choice if the service isn't there for you. It's not a choice if the only, I was talking to a woman that was living in a small town whose only option for infant childcare was a woman who didn't even have a high chair to feed the child. They were using a car seat. It's like, I'm not ready to go back because I have no place to drop off my kid. In a community like Muskoka in Ontario, the community relies on home-based childcare, not on licensed centers. The home-based care is licensed, but it's a very different modality of providing care. They used to have 30 licensed home-based centers. They now have 5. So the people that live there year-round, the women that live there are in much worse shape than they were before the pandemic. So we're not even talking about expanding a system now. We're talking about the road repair that we need to get back to full capacity pre-pandemic for women. And that will include how many grandmas had to withdraw to make sure that their adult male and female children didn't have to step away from their jobs mid-career to take care of the kids during a pandemic. Because, to be completely honest with you, the province dropped the ball on keeping kids safe in schools. It could have been done much better, and has basically, there's been the sound of crickets when it comes to childcare in Ontario. And it's the biggest province, the biggest labor market, and has the biggest share of preschoolers. 38% of all preschoolers in the country live in this province. And the province just has completely dropped the ball on how to deal with this situation for working people.
Yeah, and we're always a victim of timing of release. We're recording this on November the 19th, and the stories every day are coming out more and more about negotiations between the province and the federal government on $10 a day and the national plan. So by the time this is released, we may see something, we may not. As of right now, the province is putting up some arguments about funding proportional to its size compared to other provinces, not considering the impact of full day kindergarten, which is something that the province currently pays for that's not necessarily in each other province. And one other one that I think is maybe a bit more not talked about, rather a bit more under the radar, I guess is the term I'm looking for, is this idea of a long-term guarantee that what's going to happen afterwards. And we can all say, no government's going to cut childcare funding, but why don't you sign where the dotted line is? I'm curious, do you see credence to any of the arguments that Ontario is putting forward right now as it negotiates this deal?
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to its position on junior kindergarten, which it didn't bring into play. but does pay for. They didn't cut it either, because to your point, they couldn't, politically, they couldn't cut full day junior kindergarten. I think it's something like 90% of kids that are eligible are in it. So that's the point of the federal childcare deal. If the federal childcare deal doesn't deliver on expanded spaces and fast, the next government that comes into play can take that money and basically say, see, they're only catering to the people that already have got access to licensed care. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, but I think it's a deliberate misreading of what the federal funds are for. The federal funds aren't giving you a cookie for what you did in the past or what the governments of the past have done. It's talking about making childcare affordable, which it definitely is not in Ontario. It is the most expensive place to have childcare. So the federal government is saying, here's the money. You don't have to pony up a penny, but here's the terms on which you should accept the money. You're going to reduce costs for parents. You're going to expand spaces. And when you expand spaces, you're going to do so in ways that are licensed, enforceable. You're going to put a wage grid in place so that there is a floor under the people that are providing the care, and that if they are trained, they can see a wage grid by which their training is rewarded. And these are pretty minimal standards, right? Every province, every other province that is signed has identified how they want to expand access. Some provinces have identified that it's underserved communities like Indigenous populations or rural communities, or within big cities, it's immigrant populations living in low-income areas that have got poor access to licensed care. Sometimes it's for shift workers, that need more than the from 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock time frame. Every province can identify its priority for improving access. There is not a single province that doesn't have things to improve. Quebec got a specific deal because there's enough childcare and the price is low. So it isn't expanding access or reducing costs. What it got money for is improve the quality, because that's what everybody wants there. That's what Premier Legault campaigned on before he won, was like, let's fix the quality of childcare. It's not that we need more of it, we just need it to be better. To the point that you made earlier, that low-income households have access to high-quality care, which is expensive. You need to reduce the cost of it to make that accessibility possible. These are the households we have over a quarter century of evidence showing that when they get access to high-quality childcare, it literally pays for itself. They get to go to work, their kids are more learning ready, and that effect lasts their entire lifetime. So it's great for the public purse in Quebec. The numbers go something like, for every $100 in subsidized care in 2008, the Quebec government got $104 back in new income tax revenue, personal income tax revenue. The federal government, which at that point had done zero on childcare, got a windfall of $43. It literally paid for itself in the year it was delivered. We're not even thinking about the impact on children going down the road. That's why quality matters.
Yeah. So I think there's an interesting thread to pull here that'll bring me to a different topic unrelated to childcare that I do want to touch on that you mentioned earlier. And that's, when I was part of the Ford government and the PC party before that in opposition. And one of the things that the leader at the time ran on and then Premier Ford ended up keeping was a childcare tax credit. And, I know it's not a large amount of money, but one of the ideological points in there is that it was means tested, and it was heavier weighting and more income towards lower income families. And I think that was an interesting sort of ideological twist for the Conservative Party to recognize that. And the federal party under Aaron O'Toole put forward largely the same plan that had that component in it. And, it's worth pointing out, I think, in a matter of only a few years, we went from the party of income splitting to the party of means testing when it came to certain things. And it may not have been, it may not have been billions and billions and billions, but from that perspective, it's worth seeing that there is a bit of growth there and recognition. And one place that you've mentioned, both in written columns and on this podcast, a little bit of that ideological growth within a conservative movement, is this idea of recognizing workers. So that's my segue. But I want to talk to you a little bit about that. The province is pushing this, working for workers omnibus package of legislative reforms. The federal party had a lot of pro-worker reforms included in its electoral platform. Doug Ford obviously most popularly and most politically increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour as of this January 1st. So a cynic may say, hey, this is an electoral reading of the room. A real optimist may say this is, addressing the future labor shortages. Is it both at the same time? And is that a good thing?
100% it's both. It is a good thing. It's a sign of the times. It is an indication that whoever it is that's working with these political leaders is reading the room. I'm not sure that the leaders themselves, their inclination would be there, but the people that are shaping these platforms are 100% correct in how they're envisioning the landscape changing, because the landscape is changing. I want to address very quickly the idea of going from a party that is all about income splitting to a party that is means tested. I think the federal Conservatives went one further, which is they included the tax credit made the tax credit refundable, which means even if you're not paying taxes, you'll get something. Money in your pocket. I will say that the money in your pocket frame needs to be dumped because another way the landscape is changing is because of population aging. Seniors don't want to see prices go up. That is going to translate to, we don't want wages to go up either, because wages will be a cost push through the system. But increasingly, those people are going to die, and you're going to need to find new voters. And the new voters are working aged. And you are telling telling those new voters, old voters are telling you, you can't have a better life. How are you going to provide them a better life if wages don't go up? Well, the answer is going to be by decommodifying services. That's what this childcare thing does. It gives you very high quality services, not at market prices, at decommodified, unmarketized prices. It subsidizes the benefits of high quality service, just like we do with healthcare. The biggest way we redistribute income in Canada is through publicly offered, publicly insured and delivered hospital and doctor healthcare. While everybody can get sick, the poor get sickest quickest. And so we spend more money on redistributing value to the poorest through our healthcare system. You can expect to see that more and more with pharmacare, dental care, vision care, elder care, child care, mental health care. All of these things will, if you decommodify them, don't make it what the market will bear in terms of accessing them. And I could add to that housing or internet. When you start looking at the basic things that people need to live, and you start making them high quality versions of them affordable for more people, that's the way you improve quality of life. You literally put more money in people's pockets, but just putting money in people's pockets doesn't make high quality services or high quality affordable housing appear in the market. The market isn't delivering on these things. So I think the next step of the evolution of conservatives is coming up with their own version of how you make life better for the working age population, who will increasingly be told you can't have more money. Okay, if it's not more money, what is it? What is it that you're offering as a government? Who are you governing for, and what are you offering as a government? That's what the big fight's going to be about in the next, because we've all realized that we're more reliant on governments than ever before, whether it's steering us out of climate change or dealing with the effects of population aging and galloping inequality. We need government to do that. Markets themselves can't do it. So what's your non-market solution, our collective solutions to the problems that we're all sharing, irrespective of our incomes?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. Is where are those spaces that you want both, market dictated, but also government regulated and controlled, right? And I always kind of talk about electricity in this country as a great example where we would love if the free market provided electricity. We just don't want to pay the cost that might come with that, and so here we come and we regulate it as well, and we kind of try to pick the best of both worlds. And I don't know if government has been overtly successful at doing that in the energy space. Hopefully they have a better chance of doing it in places like the care economy. But I would also say there is an interesting aspect of, you mentioned housing as one where I could talk for a long time about. There's a place where government is probably overly regulating and doing a lot of things it doesn't necessarily need to do when it comes to approvals and planning and zoning and those types of things. And we could have a large conversation about government getting out of the way. We really could. I don't think that was in the description of the episode, but we really could. And so, I think, because I'm sure some conservative friends of mine who listen to the episode may hear you say, it's not always the free market, and inside they cringe a little bit. There are other places where perhaps we need a freer one as well. So it's about finding that balance. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because we're a significant way into this episode, you referenced it, but you didn't say the word that starts with I, which is inflation. And this is sort of the immediate concern on people's minds, is an increase in the cost of goods. It's also, when we talk about the economy and labor, this is something that people are going to be talking about in the immediate term before perhaps they open their eyes to the labor shortages that are accumulating in the real severe way. One of the easiest ways to convince people to deal with a higher cost of living is to give them money back. To a lot of people, it makes simple sense. If my grocery bill has gone up $15 a month, but my taxes go down $20 a month, I'm going to be okay. That's not really a long-term solution to an inflation problem. It's not really a way to increase purchasing power in the long term, and it's not necessarily a way to really solve some of the economic ills, even though it may be a temporary solution. Do you have a blueprint for what government should be considering doing, even if they're longer term solutions to combat rising inflation? Or is this just something we have to sort of pull up our bootstraps and deal with?
Great question. You'll remember in the summertime, we were already starting to talk about labor shortages, as the hospitality industries opened up, and, restaurants and bars and various places were having tough time finding enough people to work. So, these waves of our concern come and go. And right now it's inflation, and partly inflation is very high on the agenda because we've been seeing on the news every night, backed up shipyards at ports. We've seen the roads and bridges and railway lines collapse out west after the torrential rains, literally cutting off a part of the country from the rest of the country. So we know that the transportation infrastructure has been backed up prior to climate events. Climate events are piling up on top of that. So we are likely to be talking about inflation for a couple of months yet, but yet I will remind your entire audience that in 2020, we hit deflation twice. We had negative disinflation 2 months in a row in 2020, which we hadn't seen since the 1950s, right? So we didn't talk about it that much, but there have been tons of deflationary pressures in the system, as well as inflationary pressures. Giving people money in their pocket through a tax cut is a temporary hit that is expensive to the public purse, when what we need to do is have those resources to rebuild infrastructure, to make them more like it's, you and I come from a different political vantage point, and I would like to believe that the era of tax cuts as the answer to every flippin' thing that goes wrong is over, because we can't raise taxes going forward very much, and we will be needing governments to do more. So please don't shoot yourself in the foot before you have to act in ways that are going to be really difficult for any political party. Presumably at some point, the Trudeau Liberals will move out of office. And it is very likely that Conservatives will move into office. Please do not cut taxes first thing, because you are going to need to address so many things that only governments can do. I know that you're saying there's too much regulation in the system. Maybe we could have a whole conversation about where are the too many regulations, because we've been on a 25-year sprint on cutting red tape, right? So where are the goofy parts of over-regulating these days, and have we maybe oversteered too far? That would be a very rich conversation. The market has failed us. We need the government to do more, and we cannot raise taxes. So like, the only two things we've got going for us is governments that are willing to act in ways that maximize collective potential to grow the economy, and coming up with really smart ways of doing that. Like, yeah, that's where the marketplace of ideas is, not cutting taxes.
So I mean, I will say, just as a personal point of preference, I'm still not terribly opposed to a tax cut as a taxpayer, but as someone who's maybe having a conversation about political and policy solutions to the problem, what I would say has been an interesting development in certainly sort of the center right side of things is this move to more targeted instruments. Although a tax cut still remains inherently popular for a lot of reasons, it's fairly blunt, right? I mean, I know when Premier Ford, before he was his premier, had brought to us a bit of a public policy conundrum where he said increasing the minimum wage also increases the tax burden on those individuals, and I don't want to do that. How can we do that? And if you due to a progressive tax system, you cut the lowest bracket, you also cut it for the richest person.
Right.
And if you increase the basic personal exemption so they don't pay tax on a certain amount of income earned, you also increase the basic personal exemption for the richest person, and that's not what you're trying to do. And instead, we designed a low income families tax credit that essentially was targeted and absolved provincial income tax for those earning under what would equate to a full-time minimum wage, so at about $30,000 a year. And that was a very interesting solution. And I know the federal government had done the Canada Child Benefit as another way to have a targeted solution. Working income tax benefit is another example where they said, we know what the public policy problem is, and maybe using the sledgehammer of full across the board tax cuts isn't the way to go. So I wouldn't necessarily, from my side of things, go so far as to say the era of tax cuts is over. But I would say maybe we've picked up a scalpel instead of the saw, and we're getting a little bit more precise when we try to attempt to address some of these issues that we see coming.
From your lips to conservative strategists' ears. I won't say to God's ears, but you know where I'm going with that. Anyway, I would agree with you that you can design tax cuts in 100 different ways, and that if you are determined to do tax cuts, more surgical tax cuts that actually lift the bottom rather than go anywhere near the middle or the top, is the way to go. 100% in agreement on that. But I would ask you and your audience to consider what the opportunity cost is of a tax cut. And can you do something better with that money? Let's say, you've got another, $5 billion to spend. Let's say you got another $5 billion to spend. Do you get more bang for your buck by putting more money in the pockets of people who are at the bottom of the income spectrum, who cannot buy childcare because it does not exist in their neighborhood? They have to turn to their neighbor, who may or may not be any good. They have to ask their family and friends to stay home from work to take care of the kids. Would you get a bigger bang for your buck by giving them more money in their pocket, or you give them a bigger bang for the buck by giving them high quality housing? We're I think second to last in the OECD, in 14 OECD nations, on the amount of social housing we have as a share of our public housing, as a share of our housing stock. And housing prices in relationship to disposable income growth in the last 30 years, no country has had it worse than Canada. Like no country. We win the race on that. So, we just don't have enough of the things that money can buy. And collective action can actually increase the marketplace. So I don't know where we're going to go with this, but
yeah, I think it's a really interesting analogy that I've used before, and I don't have the answer to it exactly, but I do think it helps your point. I used to kind of always say, imagine you're a kid, you're 12 years old or whatever, you get two identical birthday cards from one set of aunt and uncle and one from the other. One's got $200 cash in it, and the other's got two Leafs tickets for the same value. If you're a hockey fan, you're going to think that aunt and uncle got you a better birthday present, even though they got you the same financial amount. And it's because in the analogy, they identified with your needs and desires, and they addressed your interests in the things that were pressing to you. And I mean, it's maybe a bit facetious to compare childcare to a kid's birthday, but the point being, there's something to be said about government actually addressing the problem that people have, rather than giving them the generic solution which they can use to address the problem. I would argue in Ontario, it would have been very interesting if the Kathleen Wynne government proposed a 25% cut to your hydro bill, and the opposition proposed 25% off your taxes so that you could pay your hydro bill. I don't think it would have made the hydro bill situation go away, even if net it was the same amount of money. So there is something to be said, I think, to your point about not just providing the tools for the solution, but actually making sure that you're sort of opening up a toolbox that people recognize in the first place, right?
Well, I guess the point I was trying to make here is one of opportunity cost. You can take that same $5 billion or the same $200 and use it in different ways. You made the analogy with a birthday gift, which is brilliant. Actually, I'm going to use that. But but we started off much earlier. You talked about the need for growth, to be able to avoid either increasing taxes or lowering services, which is the conundrum that politicians are going to be facing. So it's not just the opportunity cost of your $5 billion or your $200 or whatever it is. It's like, what actually generates more growth by you doing it? Did I change anything fundamental about the market by giving this person $200? Did I change something fundamental about the market by offering not just this person, but thousands of other people $200 worth of something? So I have to work on that analogy, but I think the distinction is between the analogy that you've used is in a very typical, what do I get from this frame, which is the way a lot of us process it. And that's what retail politics is all about.
Yeah.
But governments need to think about systems and what they're doing to the system, then how that system translates to the individual. And I just don't see tax cuts as worth the cost to the public purse in a way that they did before, when we could count on growth. We can't count on growth anymore.
Yeah.
So what are governments doing to help us develop growth?
Let me ask you, because I know we've taken quite a lot of time, and I think, from when we planned out the episode to talk about COVID and labor impacts, we've gone to a philosophical discussion about about tax policy and those sorts of things, which I think is actually a benefit. I quite like it. But I'm curious, one that I did want to ask you previously, we've spent a lot of money during this pandemic, a lot of money, and very necessary causes, keeping people's purchasing power up, ensuring wages and jobs remained, even if they were temporarily subsidized by the government. I can just recall, when I was in opposition in the province in 2014, 15, 16, 17, and so on, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation used to drive around with a debt clock. We used to see a lot of talk about the fact that Ontario was going to eclipse $300 billion in net debt for the first time in its history. We're now on pace to eclipse $400 billion in the province, and federally, the numbers are even more staggering. No one really seems to be talking about that. Is that something that we should be concerned about? And do you see people getting more concerned about that in the future as that number adds up? Or have we sort of crossed the Rubicon on the debt level that federal and provincial governments can take on, so long as their net debt to GDP doesn't eclipse a terrible number.
Talk about philosophical conversations. We could talk about this for a long time. I'm going to make 3 observations about money, not just debt, but money. The world's view of money has changed since 2008-9 for 2 reasons since 2008-9, and the third reason being the pandemic. The first reason was in the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008. Every rich country worked in lockstep to increase the amount of money in the system to prevent credit from freezing and stopping the real economy. So the financial economy got turned into like turmoil. And to prevent the contagion going over to the real economy side, where people make things and earn things, we had an unprecedented flow of quantitative easing. Mm-hmm. Suddenly there was money available, not for you and me, but for big banks. Oh my God, look, that money just appeared out of nowhere, right? In 2009, January of 2009, Bitcoin made its first appearance, largely in response to the fact that you can't count on fiat money. Fiat money gets created. Now, Bitcoin was cryptocurrencies were the haven of gangsters. That's what blockchain technology was permitting people that did illegal things to do them lucratively without being traced. And then actually floating a Bitcoin and making it mainstream and saying we need something other than fiat money introduced a whole new thing, which has led to just a few months ago, China banning cryptocurrencies because it is going to float its own digital currency. Right? It didn't want competition on who creates money. Because I don't know if you know this, when I first started looking at what was happening in cryptocurrencies, it was when I was working for Metro Morning and I was doing columns all the time. And in 2017, so in 2012, when I did my first column, there was something like 700 cryptocurrencies that were floating. Bitcoin was the biggest one. And when I did a presentation to the Canadian Association for Business Economics, of which I was president, I did a presentation on how the discipline of economics is changing. The paradigms of doing economics is changing. One of the things that I mentioned was cryptocurrency, not because of Bitcoin, but because it threatens the sovereign currency creators. And at that time, at the end of September, there were 6,000 cryptocurrencies. So we went from 700 to 6,000 between 2012 to September. The last time I checked, it was over 8,000 currencies. So new currencies are being created every day. They blur the line between the real economy and the virtual economy. They threaten to make money, the concept of money, undefinable in very important ways at very high levels of governance for countries and for central banks. And then the third way in which money lost value, like what is the meaning of money, was the pandemic. Because to your point, there was no government that didn't try and stop the bleed to be able to contain the contagion. The only way you could contain the contagion is stop people from going out. So you had to sustain them somehow. And let's not forget, this wasn't about governments throwing money at people. It was about stopping a deadly killer in its tracks, stopping needless death, which is what the role of government is. We are here to protect your life at the very least as a sovereign nation. So these 3 things have meant us to look, we now look at money differently. It isn't debt that we look at differently. It's like, where does money come from? Who creates it? How can we suddenly balloon this deficit? What does it mean? It doesn't mean that governments, at least sovereign currency creators, like the government of Canada, or the government of the United States through their central banks. Not Greece, because Greece is part of the European Union. So it can't issue its own currency, which was what Brexit was all about way before Brexit, right? It's like if we just left the European Union, we could print our own currency and we could resolve this debt crisis. So it only works at the sovereign currency issuer level. It does not work for the government of Ontario because the government of Ontario does not issue the Canadian dollar. Mm-hmm. So you have these different levels of government with different abilities to meet public needs. And you are seeing the federal government stepping up in a way that it was stepping out of the room for 30 years, right? It's like, let the provinces do stuff. We'll download responsibilities, but not the dollars that go with it. So the provinces were doing more and municipalities were doing more and more heavy lifting with no ability to issue currency to do it. The only tool it had was to raise taxes and to ask for more money from the feds. But the feds were busy sanitizing their own balance sheets, right? Because everybody thinks deficits and debts are the most important thing in the world. And now we are getting a total reversal of that. But here's the really important thing. The federal government is rewriting fiscal federalism as we speak. The early learning and childcare deals are the first example of, I'm here for you. I've got your back. I'm not asking you to spend more money. Here, have this money and do this other thing that you have not done yet that is more than what you were doing in the past. But it comes with strings. It comes with strings that are tied to, I want to see different outcomes in how many people get access to service, what the quality of that service is, and how much you pay the people that are trained to provide those services. That's a new form of fiscal federalism. We have never seen it before in this country. And I think this is a very long-winded answer to, do debts not matter anymore? At some level, of course they matter. The question is not, why do you have a debt or how big it is? The question is not, how big is your debt? The question is, what did you use that money to do? In the case of the pandemic, we had no options. We didn't actually spend as much as lots of other nations did, and we're not as indebted as lots of other nations. Debt isn't the problem. We bounced back faster in terms of job recreation and job recovery than the United States has. There's still about 4 million jobs short, where now, as far as headcounts go, we're at the same level we were before the pandemic. And, our benefits permitted people to keep working a bit. Well, they got benefits because they lost so many hours, but you could stay connected to the labor market. That made a big difference in the way we provided benefits. But the point is that everybody had to do something. So how fast do you want to reduce the debt and deficit now? That isn't the question. The question is, how are we going to get back on our feet? What's the resilience we need to meet climate change events, to actually meet the fact that so many people are still sidelined from the labor market, to meet the fact that more people are leaving the labor market than entering it? What are we doing about these big picture things? Does it involve the federal government spending more? Yes, it will. And if we get a federal government that thinks that deficits and debts are the most important thing, we're going to lose our status as the 10th largest economy on the surface of the planet. It is that simple. We cannot grow if the federal government is determined to shrink its size.
Yeah, I'd say it seems like perhaps a good bookend for the conversation, because it's maybe a bit of a thesis of some of the things you've talked about today, which is spending the dollars isn't bad so long as you're spending on something that is good, good for the economy, good for individuals, and ultimately, in some way, good for families. And guess what? The economy, individuals, and families, that's voters too. So if you're coming from the political side or from the traditional economic and labor side, listening to this podcast, I think you can find yourself in it. So, Armine, I just really want to say first, thanks for taking a good amount of time today to have this conversation, and appreciate your insights. And second, thanks for coming on the program. Thank you for listening to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the Strategy Core Institute of Public Policy and Economy, produced by Sarah Bordeaux and myself. Views expressed during this podcast are not necessarily the views of Strategy Corp. All rights to this episode are reserved, and guests on the podcast may be current or past clients of Strategy Corp. To find out more about the Institute and to subscribe to our written material or to find past episodes of the podcast, please visit our website at www.strategycorp.com/institute. Until next time.